a dear friend and a colleague. She has facilitated safe technology practices in schools and helped to pass a groundbreaking law in New Hampshire to investigate the health and environmental impact of wireless radiation and 5G. I'm super honored to have her here tonight. She's a wealth of knowledge. She loves this subject. She's deeply, this is her mission. She's super compassionate and passionate about this and really helping families to get the tools, the awareness that they need to minimize the risks of technology, especially on mental and physical health. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Cece. You will have an opportunity to ask her questions in the chat. We are on a webinar, so you're not going to be able to just ask her things directly. So just know that we will be recording this. I'm going to push the record button when Cece starts. And if you want a copy of this, or you want to play it back, or you want to pass it on to someone else, the best way to do that is to sign up on Ben Speaks newsletter at benspeaks.org. And we will be sending out a newsletter in the next week or two where you'll get a recording. You can also pick up all the recordings of our featured speakers on our Ben Speaks website. So again, without further ado, I give you Susie Doucette, and thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much, Judy. It's such an honor to be here with you. If you would be so kind as to give me, oh, you did give me host capabilities. You are on the ball, woman. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a presentation here. And thank you for that kind introduction, Judy. So I've helped to form a group called Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So there are people all over the state, all over the country, and all over the world who are tuning in to this wireless radiation issue. And so what we'll do tonight is we'll go through my presentation, and anywhere that we have links or underlines, that information you can drill down into, because I tell people, don't take my word for any of this. Don't take anybody's word. Use your own methodologies for going in and doing research, and then make your choices for how you want to handle the technology in your life. So I will make this slideshow available to Judy for distribution afterwards to go out along with the video. And we'll go through a little bit about how I learned about this issue. We'll talk about what does the science tell us about wireless technology. And then what is the fine print that came with all of our devices that very few of us know exists in there? And then what are the solutions? How do we make the choices to transition from where we are right now to using technology, but much more safely? And so we'll go through that. We'll talk about what our municipalities might do, as well as what we personally might choose to do. And then we'll open it up for the questions and answers. So if you have questions along the way, just feel free to pop them into the chat and we will address them at the end. All right, so I used to help run our local education foundation here in Ashland, Massachusetts. And we kept hearing from the industry about this 21st century classroom and how all of our kids were going to need access to all this equipment and technology in order to be successful in our world. So our budgets in Ashland had been cut to the bone for a really long time. And so we didn't have funding to start buying all this stuff. So I was volunteering with our Ed Foundation, and we began to run campaigns to get wireless infrastructure, to get iPads and Chromebooks and minis and smart TVs and what we thought was all of this great new technology. So then one night at book group, a friend of mine who's an electrical engineer tipped us off that there could be some biological effects that were harmful from wireless technology. So I'm a technical and professional writer by trade, and digging into things and researching is part of what I do. So I started looking at this, and I was astounded at the science that I was finding, and we'll go into that in a little bit. So I got way in over my head, and I couldn't remember where I saw credible sources that I later wanted to share. So as a tech writer, I just built myself a very simple research repository that I called Understanding EMFs. And EMF simply stands for electromagnetic fields. And that's the pulsation of microwave radio frequency radiation that's coming out of all of our wireless devices and all of our infrastructure that they put up outside. So when we look at this graph down here, so this is what my research repository looks like. If anybody wants to go out there and pound around, you're more than welcome to use that as a launch point. And the electromagnetic spectrum is never something that I ever thought I would need to know about, but now I do. It talks about how long the waves are that are carrying our signals and our data invisibly, and how frequently those waves are pulsed. So what we're talking about tonight is the microwave spectrum, and that's where we've got the cell towers, the cell phones, the utility meters, the smart meters they're putting on our homes for gas, water, electric, and solar metering to see what our usage is. Microwave ovens, Wi-Fi, baby monitors, gaming devices, cordless phones, radar, all of this is in this microwave segment. So that's probably as technical as we're going to get. But what does the science tell us? So it tells us that this radio frequency radiation that a lot of us carry around in our pockets or tuck into our waistbands or stick in our back pockets or stuff into our bras, or, you know, we become so part and parcel with this that we've never been taught to think about it, that it could be harmful. But when I read the infertility studies, that's when I realized, wow, people need to know about this. They've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas turned on, and it slowed the motility of the sperm. It caused far fewer sperm to be viable, and it changed the DNA, which is the roadmap to grow a proper little human or any cell, within 4 hours of exposure. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And my youngest had just gone into high school. She was 15, and we had just given her a laptop. And of course, where is she using it? Right on her lap, right on top of her reproductive organs. So that was the day I found my voice on this issue. But the DNA damage, child and adult cancers. So for a lot of years, the industry used to spin this like, oh, more science is needed, right? Or, oh, that's just one study. You know, it takes more than one study. Well, our government, the Food and Drug Administration, commissioned a study about 20 years ago to go in and investigate whether cell phones could harm us or not, because that was the technology of the day way back then. And it took them many years to do this study. It was a series of studies. And at the end of the day, they held an unprecedented 3-day peer review, which means you bring in other experts from all over, and in this case, it was all over the world, who have worked with this microwave radiation in their labs, in their science, in their medical. And at the end of the day, they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, among other findings. Now, the National Toxicology Program is part of our National Institutes of Health. This is like the world's preeminent researcher on toxins, and they're telling us clear evidence of cancer and DNA damage. And so, again, the industry will take that and they'll spin it and say, oh, that's just one study, keep doing what we're doing. Well, right on the heels of our $30 million study coming out, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study, and their findings corroborated everything that we found here. So we can always learn more and refine the science, but we don't need more science to take action today. And then the neurotoxicity, which I know is perhaps near and dear to many who are participating on this call or who will watch this video later through Ben Speaks. What the neuroscience with radio frequency microwave radiation is showing us is that it is a neurotoxin. It can open up the blood-brain barrier. So we have these membranes that keep toxins from going into sensitive areas in our bodies, and the brain has that blood-brain barrier. And what the science shows is this pulse of microwave radiation opens that up. So now as the toxins are meant to be escorting through our blood out of the body, they can take a turn and go into the brain. And so we have these, you know, we literally have epidemic proportions now of anxiety, of depression, of suicidal ideation, PANS, PANDAS, all these diseases that we didn't deal with this magnitude just 10 or 20 years ago. So autism, Dr. Martha Herbert founded the autism lab over at Mass General Hospital. She sees huge correlations between the families in her care and what we know happens with microwave radiation exposure. Alzheimer's, another neurotoxic disease that we're seeing come on at earlier and earlier ages as we become more and more saturated in these environmental toxins. And children are especially vulnerable. They're not just little people. Their very nervous system is still under construction. Their immune system is still under construction. This is hugely disruptive to the circadian rhythm. And biologically, their brains have a higher water content and their skulls are thinner. So if you look at this diagram on the bottom here, and these heads are turned sideways as if the phone were modeled right there. But on an adult, when you put the phone up to your head, it's penetrating your brain about 1/3 of the way through your brain. On a 10-year-old child, that's going about 2/3 of the way through the child's brain. And on a smaller child like this 5-year-old, it's penetrating and permeating the entire brain with microwave radiation. So those are some of the long-term effects. Now in the short term, many of us will recognize some of these symptoms. Our government in the Americans with Disabilities Act already recognizes microwave sicknesses, and they call these electrical sensitivities because biologically and chemically, we are electrical beings. Our cells whisper to one another all the time and convey all these signals. And now we have this electropollution that interferes with all of that signaling. So a lot of the short-term symptoms that people experience include insomnia. That's a huge one. In the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, our brain is meant to release melatonin during the wee hours. And melatonin then goes in and regulates our sleep, but also helps to escort the toxins of the day out of the body. Well, what happens when we have a router on, when we have a cell phone in our room, the Roku, the Chromecast, anything, the wearables, anything that's emitting wireless radiation, our brain sees that as a light energy form. So it never gets to the point of the wee hours of darkness when it would normally release the melatonin. So we're really corrupting our body's own ability to regulate and to keep us healthy and to keep us sleeping properly. Stabbing, searing, headaches, migraines, nosebleeds and ear bleeds. My own daughter had a migraine in high school. What kids have migraines, right? That's not supposed to be happening. And nosebleeds. And some people get the ear bleeds too with extensive exposure. And so we fixed it in our house and her headaches and nosebleeds went way down. This chronic fatigue that so many people feel, our cells only have so much energy and they've got a pretty big job already to do normal cell repair and regeneration. And now we're compounding it with this toxic thing that is pulsing at us all the time. So our poor little cells have a very difficult time and it's cumulative. So the more we allow ourselves to be exposed, the more it's going to deteriorate our health and leave us feeling pretty wiped out. And then a lot of people who become ill from this have pain that, they can't account for, their doctors can't account for. And then skin abnormalities could be, some people will talk about, my ear gets really hot when I'm on the phone. So that heating or flushing, you start turning red or you start getting, hives or skin rashes. There's a gentleman in Framingham who figured this out because his leg was going jiggity. He had a cell phone in his leg and the nerves in his leg started going haywire. And when he started, his doctors couldn't figure it out. So he did his own research and figured out that this was jacking his nerves in his pocket. Heartbeats racing too fast or slowing down too much. And cognitive impairments, a big one, the brain fog. And it's not just the elderly who are especially susceptible because as we age, our own cognitive abilities start to deteriorate a little bit. So it's big for our seniors, but it's also for us and for our children who are developing the attention span of a gnat, right? They can't focus, they can't concentrate. So, and then we get into the anger and the behavior issues. there's a mom in my town who I educated on this, and after she decided to fix things in her own home, she said, my husband and I are just looking at each other, waiting for the other shoe to drop because their son had had severe behavioral issues. They cleaned up the house. They got rid of these signals. He was in a classroom that didn't have wireless in it. And she said, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. He's like this nice, sweet, happy child who can actually play with other children, from a 1-hour session that I had with her. And then she called me and said, my little guy, after you left my house, we fixed everything. My little guy slept through the night for the first time in his life, and he was 2.5. And that whole family, you know, when you've got babies up in the night, everybody's knuckle dragging. So very great improvements we may see with a little bit of education. And then there's the anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. We are literally at epidemic proportions today. And I don't need to tell you guys who are living this, but, you know, and there's certainly more than one cause for any of this, but peeling this back can bring great gains in a shorter amount of time. So this study over here, microwave frequency, electromagnetic fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. If somebody wants to sit down and look at the science, that's a really good one to look at. And it's not just us, it's our whole planet, because our planet is comprised of, you know, ecosystems, biological cells for our plants and animals and the pollinators and the birds. And we're really disrupting them because they have a navigation system. They have something that's called magnetite, and their own magnetite is meant to be in sync with the Earth's electromagnetic field. That's how they navigate. That's how they get around. And now we put this whole layer of electrosmog, so we're dysregulating their ability to do what they need to do, and we rely on them for us to eat, let alone for themselves, and why we should be protecting them. In The Hague in the Netherlands, when they started doing 5G testing, literally hundreds of birds dropped dead out of the sky. And I just got reports that on the cruise ships where they put 5G antennas up on top of the ship, the birds are drawn toward it, and then they get closer, and then they get zapped, and they just are dropping dead onto the decks of the ship. So yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And, you know, who would ever stop to think about all the minerals that have to be mined to make our digital devices if we knew of the humanitarian tolls that are being taken down in the Congo and elsewhere? And then they have to wash all those minerals, and they're taking water away from communities that don't have enough water to begin with for their families, and using it to wash those minerals. So there's a really dark and shadowy side of this. Energy consumption is another big one. Wireless consumes 10 times more energy than the safe solution, which is just hardwiring and running your signals through a cable. Our data warehouses, all of our networks, all of our personal devices, you know, we've never been taught to think about. Streaming takes a huge amount of energy. Every time we send and receive a text or an emoji or, you know, something cute, it's all using energy in the background. And every time we charge and recharge our devices every single day, we're using a lot of energy. And then in the background, unless we know better, you know, everyone wants us to have their apps. So we download all these apps, and we probably don't even use them very much. Maybe a couple we use regularly. But in the background, if we leave those on our devices, they're continuously updating in the background, and that's using energy too. So lots of good resources if you want to dig deeper into that. So when I figured all this out, I thought I would take it to my schools, and I would raise my hand and say, I think we have a problem here. And I figured if we had a gas leak in the science lab, they would evacuate the building and fix the problem. That's what I thought we would do with this. But that's not at all what happened. I got no response. I'm sending our schools things like the French National Library in 2008 took wireless out because of the health considerations. And I just kept sending the science and stuff, and I got like crickets. Until I think when they read the legal fine print, which I'll show you in a minute, they decided to form a subcommittee, and we went in and started measuring the exposures. And I succumbed eventually, and I bought myself a scientific device that allows us to see this invisible toxin. So right now in my house, I aim for as low as reasonably achievable, right? So we see green down here. The science is still investigating what happens in that green level, and there is no safe level of microwave radiation in the science. That's the bottom line. So our goal is to eliminate as much as we can. But watch what happens when I turn my cell phone back into active mode. And as a rule, I keep my cell phone in airplane mode because that turns off all the radiation and the antennas in it. But watch this. So, although you and I can't hear that or see that with our own eyes and ears, our cells feel that, and that's what our cells are up against. And that was just one device. Imagine our poor kids in these classrooms where the industry has forced in this 21st century classroom, and now they've got 20 or 30 devices that we've given them, and we've given our schools have given the kids tablets to study from home with no safety information. And the message is not no technology, it's safe technology, and we know how to get there. But ours, you know, we went in and we measured the schools and stuff, and they came up with this little sign that says to turn off the device when not in use, turn the Wi-Fi on only when you need it, and always place the mobile device on a solid surface. And keep your distance. Distance is our friend, right? So we became the first, I didn't know it at the time, but we became the first in the United States to even hang this little sign. You know, here it is. It's hanging in all of our classrooms in the Ashland Public School District. But even though we have that sign, they're still waiting for higher authorities to really turn off the wireless and protect the kids. And here's what I think happened. Any of you with us tonight who has an iPhone with you, I would invite you to bring that out right now and go into settings. We're going to show you where the legal fine print is that discloses some of this stuff. So for those who might have an Android or a Google phone or whatever, if you were to just put in a search and look up your manufacturer and model and put RF exposure for radio frequency, you'll find something similar. But in an iPhone, to see the fine print, and you can go to this website too, they've pulled up some common things that are hidden in the fine print. So from settings, scroll down just a little ways and hit general. And then on an old phone, you would then hit about up at the top, but most people have upgraded. So now from general, you just go all the way down to the bottom. Second from the bottom, you'll see legal and regulatory. And then you hit that. And a few items down that next list, you see RF exposure. And that's our radio frequency microwave radiation that they politely call energy. And when we read this legal fine print, it tells us a couple of really important things. One, they tested this at a distance. So they put spacers in, and then they tested how much radiation. What the independent testing facilities are now showing is that when you use that phone like we use it and you put it up against your head, you're exceeding the FCC guidelines for public radiation exposure by anywhere from like 4 to 11 times. And the worst part is those FCC guidelines were never safety tested. They were set to allow radiation this high, and the science today shows biological harm at hundreds of thousands of times below that limit that the industry is still allowed to peddle their products to us. The second thing in that fine print is it says to use a hands-free option, because without being forthright and telling us that one cell phone now has 5 or 6 separate antennas in there that are constantly, individually pulsing for a handshake with the nearest cell tower or router at billions of cycles a second. So again, the message is not no technology, it's safe technology. And now that we know, we can choose to turn off all those antennas and only turn on the one that you need, and only at the time that you need it, if you so choose. So when I was diving into this and I'm looking at this science and I'm thinking, if this is as bad as what I'm able to find, surely somebody must have our backs on this. And I fell down the rabbit hole with this about 2012, 2013, and it wasn't until 2015 that Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came out with this free online report called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And when we skim through Captured Agency, we see that big Wi-Fi is now basically using the big tobacco playbook. Suppress evidence of harm, create your own studies that show no harm, use your power and might and money to write your own laws up at the federal level, and you own the media, so you can put whatever you want out there and seduce people into buying all these new sexy products without telling them any safety measures for using them. So we're in trouble up at the federal agency level. And our Government Accountability Office in 2012 actually said to the FCC, it looks like your guidelines might be out of date. Let's open up a docket, get some information in, and let's take a look at this. Well, they did. They left that docket open for 6 years. And when they closed it recently, just in the last year, when they closed it, that allowed that formal judgment to go hit the Federal Register. And what happened is the Food and Drug Administration that commissioned that big study that showed cancer and DNA damage, the guy who's heading that up, Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, he turned around to the FCC and said, no need to change anything. Keep doing what you're doing. Well, one might ask, what would ever possess this guy to do that? Well, he today is in charge of the radiation area of the FDA. His wife is a partner in a law firm that represents the industry to the tune of billions of dollars. So he should never have been near that study. And so now our captured agencies just keep pointing at each other, right? And it's not just here, it's in Europe too. The International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, they're riddled with industry influence too. So that's what's happening at the federal level. And now, as if that all weren't bad enough, we're now faced with 5G. And 5G simply means 5th generation technology. And logically, one might think that, that's just the next thing after 3G and 4G. And that's what our current cell phones run on, is 3rd and 4th generation. But this is very different. The industry is spinning it up that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads, smart cities, super highways. If you look to see what the wireless industry is buying up, they're buying up the entertainment industry because they've got that pegged as one of their next new revenue streams. What they're not telling us is this is not going to replace all these big cell towers that have been encroaching closer and closer. They're adding onto it with these new little waves. So the 3G and 4G waves are big enough to be able to come into our buildings. These little dinky millimeter waves are all that's left, and they don't go through objects very well. So the industry's goal is to put millions of small cell antennas that look like things like in this middle picture, put millions of them all over our country, all over our world, right outside our homes, at the curb. These cell towers are popping up. And Judy, I'm sorry to show you this map here down on the bottom right. Every polka dot is a small cell antenna in Boston. They've already penetrated Boston, and they're putting applications into all of our towns. So, and you know what they do is they come in and they peddle their products where they can make the most money in the densely populated areas, and they promise they'll bring great technology out to all of our rural communities too, and they've never delivered on that. They still don't have good high-speed internet connections. And so now they're going to say, oh, well, we got a solution for that too. We're going to hang satellites from the sky and beam this radiation down so it can reach every corner of our planet. This is what 5G is. 5G and the Internet of Things, IoT. They want to sell you every product with a radiation antenna in it so they can harvest your data and sell that to third-party vendors who then will want to come and sell you their appliances or their potty seat for the babies or whatever you're buying. They want your data, and that's where the money's to be made for 5G. The kicker is it was never safety tested. Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut held a congressional hearing with the Commerce Committee and said point blank to these two industry leaders, please share with us how much money has been invested in independent scientific research to prove that this is safe before bringing it to market. And these two industry guys kind of hem and hawed and went, well, we don't actually know of any research that's been done. So Senator Blumenthal said, so basically, as far as health and safety is concerned, we're flying blind here. So that's what's happening. But technology groups like Computer World, the publication, has just come out with an article saying, you know what? 5G is a bad joke. They're telling us we're going to get all these great speeds, but we're already getting those speeds with 4G. So what the heck do we need 5G for? So they're not even delivering on the speed promises that they're making, and there are other groups calling that out too. So that's all the bad news. That's all the bad news, but there's an awful lot of good news happening, and we're joining this conversation at a great point in time because solutions abound, and I'll whip through these pretty quickly, but Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that when important social change happens, it comes through 3 channels. The public engages, which is what we're fortunate to do tonight. The courts make rulings to finally come out on the right side of the public. And then public policy catches up to the issue, and then public policy is enacted. So let's go through this real quickly. This is what we're doing tonight. There are actions happening all over. The legal team with the City of Boston has already filed a public comment with the FCC saying, we believe the public, we don't trust those guidelines you guys have got. The town of Burlington came up with a small cell policy that had Verizon withdraw their applications. That's being used as a national example. In Shelburne, Massachusetts, they put in their little town ordinance in their bylaws that you can't put these things within 1,500 feet of where somebody lives. And in the schools, you can't put up a cell tower within 3,000 feet. They really should be miles away, but at least this is a good start. In Easton, Connecticut, there was a grandmother who figured this out. She took it to her town, and they voted to put a ban on installing 5G in their town. In Hawaii County, they started this conversation on the big island of Hawaii, and they came up with a resolution that they don't want 5G. Bermuda, same thing. This is happening all over the world, but we never hear about it because the media is also captured by the industry. Public engagement, there's activity with the Department of Public Utilities. We were just testifying with them recently with a medical doctor, with scientists, engineers, to make sure we get a right to choose, not to have these toxic meters mounted on our homes that we have no control over. So we got a lot of good testimony in on that. And down in Maryland, the largest water utility, like an hour before we went into this hearing, the largest water utility in the United States in Maryland just indefinitely deferred their smart meter project. So good things are happening. Pennsylvania courts have ruled that you can't force people to have this toxic metering on your home. French courts have ruled against the industry. The FCC's now been sued by the City of Boston because the FCC keeps taking local control away from our towns. And now others are also suing, and you guys can drill into that if you're interested. We had a lawsuit right here in Massachusetts at the Fay School in Southborough, very prestigious international boarding school. And for the first time in American courts, they recognized that, yes, there is harm from this technology. So that was breakthrough. Here's our greatest hope today. We helped get a law passed in New Hampshire in 7 months' time. I have been working with the Massachusetts legislature for 6 years to try and get a bill passed. Others have been working for 8 years. And in 7 months' time, we testified, we brought in experts, and they passed a law to answer these questions. Lo and behold, the insurance industry recognized this as a leading risk a long time ago, and they've had exclusions in their policies. So our towns don't have coverage when we sign or when we approve an application. We need to make sure that part of that contract needs to include that the industry's on the hook for any harm from this. Otherwise, our towns are just sitting ducks. There's that fine print. And why is the FCC ignoring all the science? Why do they allow 100 times more radiation here than other countries? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect on us and our children? So they passed this law and said, we have to get answers to this. So they formed a commission. The commission spent the last year investigating, and on November 1st, they issued this wonderful report. It looks really fat. It's 390 pages, but the actual recommendations are in the first 17 pages. Then the industry was allowed to put their minority report in here, which at the very end, there's minutes from all their meetings in here, and the science is in the appendices. But in the last set of minutes, as the industry is presenting their minority report, commission members were questioning in them and providing facts that counter the spin that the industry just keeps pushing out with all this misinformation. So the New Hampshire report is wonderful. We should all be taking this to our legislators and saying, look what New Hampshire did. We want us some of that, right? So that one was great. And then in Oregon, there were citizens who brought this issue to their legislators, and Senator Anderson in Oregon is a retired public health nurse. When she looked at the science, it didn't take her long to figure this out. She introduced an emergency law that got passed again in less than a year, and their public health authority, like our Massachusetts Department of Public Health, they've been investigating the non-industry funded peer-reviewed science, and they're due to report back the first week in January, which is just weeks away now. So we're excited to see what will happen there. But a lot of other states are paying attention to this, not just the biological effects, but the excessive screen time too. And this is happening all over the world. That European report, or that New Hampshire report just last Monday, was cited by the European Parliament as a good roadmap to follow. So there's lots of information. The World Health Organization is investigating this again. Here's the kicker for our schools. Silicon Valley executives are banning screens from their children. They're sending their children to schools like Waldorf, where they don't have any technology. And they're even going so far as to making their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens with their children. And yet they continue to peddle this toxic technology to our children. So we did an expert panel here in Massachusetts. There's really good videos in there if you want to go in and look at the school environment more closely. Maryland became the first in the US to recommend hardwiring our schools and getting rid of the wireless. And other groups that certify for green schools, this one already has low EMF best practices to show us how to have safe schools. And here's a good set of recommendations for studying at home. Hardwire, limit the amount of screen time by age. They've got some good guidelines in there. And then I've had the privilege of forming a nonprofit out of Europe with some other colleagues, and we have literally off-the-shelf training. We can train an entire school in about a half an hour online. So resources abound, but just a little word of caution. I was over at the Dover-Sherborne School District, and we had gotten a meeting with the Wellness Committee. And as we were sharing this information, one of the gentlemen had his iPad, and he just popped on and started looking this up. And he said, well, look, the New York Times says it's fine, or the World Health Organization says it's fine. And that is what you see first. And so you stop looking. Who would know that this gentleman at the New York Times, Bill Broad, is a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, and he puts out a story calling 5G the health hazard that isn't, trying to blame it all on the Russians for scaremongering. Well, what people wouldn't know is that there's a 5G lab from Verizon at the New York Times. They have industry on their board, huge conflicts of interest. And in Ireland, the ombudsman there actually called out the New York Times for violating the truth and accuracy code. So there's so much more to the story than what we get through corporate-owned mainstream media. And the World Health Organization classified this as a group 2B human carcinogen, possible carcinogen, back in 2011. And now that we have these other studies done, they've been made to reopen that investigation. But who would know? There's 2 groups at the WHO. One is funded by industry, and their information is still up there saying, no harm, inconclusive. There's another group that's run by real scientists, but who would even know to go looking for that when the other one pops up first? So we're hoping true due diligence will be done, but we know it could be another captured agency with the industry here. So for our towns, we just need to help them see what this issue is and differentiate the industry priorities from the public's. We have this wonderful book that can teach our towns how to get back to safe technology. And when we measure, we have guidelines for what biological impacts are instead of those crummy FCC guidelines that don't protect us. And, you know, others around the world are dealing with this too. So what can you and I do? What can we do for our own personal choices? Turn it off, right? Give yourself some freedom. Get away from your devices. Or, you know, some people say, but I use my cell phone as my alarm clock. Put it in airplane mode and turn off all those antennas. And then in airplane mode, your clock still works, your alarm still works, your camera still works, anything, any entertainment you've downloaded on your device, it's all right there for you to enjoy. You don't need to be sending signal to enjoy whatever's on your device. So just know all these antennas we should account for. And be very mindful of secondhand radiation, just like we ultimately did with secondhand smoke, because we shouldn't have this anywhere near children. We shouldn't have it in the baby carriage. We shouldn't be wearing a wearable and holding a baby in our arms. So we're just having to do a mind shift to be aware. So just start noticing and then come back to the table and decide what you might do. So what does safe technology look like? It's really not rocket science. We were there 10 years ago until they sold us all on wireless. So on the back of our routers, there's an Ethernet port, a little jack in there. You just get a big long Ethernet cable and plug it back in. Look for one that says shielded, because that means there's a thin layer of foil inside the cord, and that keeps dirty electricity from seeping out through electric and magnetic fields like 6 to 8 feet into your room, which is another harmful form of electromagnetic field. So look for a shielded Ethernet cable. And then an Ethernet switch, you could think of it as an extension cord for technology. It's just a little box that has all these little ports in it. And when you plug an Ethernet cable into one of these, you get your own internet line. So you're not having to struggle with one another over bandwidth. You get a much better connection than you will with wireless. And then you just get little adapters for your individual devices. So here's what it would look like. Here's the back of your router with all the little jacks in it. Get a big cable and run it up to wherever you use your technology most of the time. And then if you have more than one device, you know, a cell phone or a tablet or a laptop, just get little Ethernet cables and plug each one in, and you might need to get a little adapter. Who knew? You can buy a little $20, $30 adapter and hardwire an iPhone, or you can hardwire an Android, or you can hardwire a tablet. It's not rocket science. And then you just go into each device and turn off in the settings all of those antennas. And, you know, at home, wireless was never meant to be used indoors. It was meant to be when you're on the go and you had an emergency, right? But now they've permeated inside of our buildings. I still use the corded landline at my home. I paid like $30 online at Staples for this one. So it's not rocket science. The cost is not terribly prohibitive. You know, you can fix it for like $100 or so. It's not that bad. And then there are these tools. You know, I went after a grant in Ashland, and we became the first in the nation to put one of these devices on loan in our public library. And we'd be happy to share with you the forms that we use to check that out and stuff. So it's important to measure, because these antennas are showing up everywhere now. But if this terrifies you, some people say, oh, I know, I got a box of Ethernet cables in my closet or in my basement. I'll just go grab them. Other people, it's terrifying. They just want nothing to do with having to fix this. There are professionals out there that you can hire to come into your home and help you with that. And here's a couple of good resources there. And then if we can help others learn, like our healthcare teams, this was one of the big gaps we had, is we had far too many sick people getting misdiagnosed. And now we are able to train our doctors, our nurses. They can go for continuing education credits. And our first responders and our therapists, you know, any public health person, any mental health person can be trained at this conference at the end of January. And there's also a website they can go to and just start pounding around and saying, wow, I never knew any of this existed. Look at all these credible resources with Physicians for Safe Technology. Same thing with engineers and physicists. They've only been taught you have to have heat from a device to have harm, and that's not at all what the science proves. So we have, you know, resources to help them as well. And here for us, for our loved ones, these online courses, and then this award-winning film, Generation Zapped, 74 minutes. You'll learn, this was part of the United Nations Film Festival. And Bert Wolf on PBS does a travel show. He did 2 episodes on this. Who would know, right? And then if you're going to get active with this and start talking to your friends and neighbors in towns, these wonderful folks at 5gcrisis.com have created all these templates. So you don't have to start from zero. You can just go snag some of this stuff and start the conversation, because unfortunately, nobody else is going to fix this. In our democracy, if the public doesn't speak up, nothing changes, right? So for those who are struggling with loved ones who may be, you know, pretty well into addiction with their digital devices, there's excellent resources out there, and I just suggested 4 here. And these are all mental health experts, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists. Reset Your Child's Brain has a 4-week protocol to get everybody around your child knowledgeable about what you're planning to do, so he doesn't, you know, run up the street to little Billy's house and get his fix on the technology there. But then for the next 3 weeks, you wean your child off of it. And as frightening as that sounds, by the end of it, these kids and their families are so grateful. And here are other great books. Actually, just before I got on with you tonight, I was given a new 28-minute video with Tom Kirsting, who is a school psychotherapist, and he's talking about what this is really doing to our kids. So there's a 28-minute YouTube that is now public, and anybody can go out and watch that too. He also published a book called Disconnected, and all these books talk about the harm that it's doing to our children. So for our physical and mental health, it's really important to avoid excessive screen time, even though that's become the norm today. And we need to set limits not only for our children, but for ourselves, and learn to be the good role model so that people can say, oh, wow, you are actually pulling away from this. And at the end of my work week, for my out-of-office responder, I put up an unplugged responder, and I simply say, hey, I'm unplugged for the weekend. I'll catch you next Monday, right? And people come back and say, wow, you really do that? And I'm like, yeah. And then they're like, I'm going to do that because I know I'm on way too much. And then there's this great little poster here called 50 Ways to Take a Break, because when you remove the wireless device or even a hardwired device that's being overused, people forget what to do with themselves. How do we connect back to ourselves, right? And so I love this little poster. I printed it and I hang it next to my desk to remind myself to get outside, go back into nature, go do some yoga, go play with a cat, go play with a kid, go do an art project, go do an act of kindness to somebody, get up and dance while you're cooking dinner, you know, listen to some music, all these things that fill us up with joy and help to bring balance back into our lives. That's a good one. And then grounding is really important. Every living thing is meant to be connected to the earth because we get electrons that go up and help to regulate and harmonize our own bodies. Now we walk around in rubber-soled shoes, and that blocks those electrons from coming up. So this wonderful book called The Earth Prescription, this Dr. Conover, she's a medical doctor. She takes it through all 4 seasons, and she doesn't like the cold any more than I do. I'm from California and Hawaii, so it's not in my bones to love this cold, but she teaches us in every season how to ground naturally. Who knew? You can just stroke the leaves or the pine needles, anything with a high water content, you are instantly grounded. If you have a pet that's out on the ground, you know, rub their little ears and their snout and stuff, the ones that, you know, you can reach easily. You instantly ground through them being on the grass or on the cement. Blacktop doesn't ground you. It's got stuff in it that blocks those electrons. So thank you for listening. I know it's a lot, and I know that it takes a while to get your head around it, and we certainly appreciate that, but you're halfway there now because you know, and now you'll have resources to go dive. And like I said, don't take my word for it. Go learn enough for yourself that you feel comfortable making personal choices that might protect yourself and your loved ones. And it's hard, you know, I have young adult children, and I've had to learn myself. I can't change anybody but myself. But what I can do is provide a good example and provide facts that people can then look at if they choose and make their own decisions. So feel free to look for me through Massachusetts for Safe Technology, through Wireless Education, through the EMF Medical Conference. These are all initiatives that many, not just me, many people are behind, and we stand on the shoulders of giants in the scientific and medical community. So anything we can do, please let us know. There's a question from Gail that says, regarding routers, Comcast routers have a switch to turn off the Wi-Fi signal, and a call to Comcast is necessary to turn it off. Verizon routers, even if you cable wire it, the Wi-Fi signals cannot be turned off. Some of that I've had experience with. So we started with Verizon. That's what we had when I first learned about this. I called up Verizon once I decided to hardwire my home because the router down in my basement was still pulsing all the time. And so I called up Verizon and said, you know, I'm choosing to hardwire. How do I stop that thing from transmitting radiation? And the rep said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? And he said, yeah, just go online with me. I'll walk you through how to get into your account. We got into my account online, and there was a wireless settings button. And I clicked on that, and it showed me that there were 2 antennas in that one box in my basement. And all I had to do was go off, apply. And within a minute, that radiation was gone. And I went down and I measured to make sure it was gone. And then my husband saw a better deal with the internet service provider of Comcast. And so he wanted to switch to save a little money. And when he talked to them, he said, you know, my wife's going to want to make sure that whatever you bring into our house, we can hardwire and turn off the wireless. And the guy says, no problem. They send the tech out. He spends, you know, a couple hours switching out the boxes in our house. And then I said, oh, just humor me. Before he left, we walked back down there to the new box he put in. And I turned on my meter and it went right off the charts in the red zone. And I said, you got the 2.4 gigahertz antenna, right? And he said, yeah, that's off. And I said, what about the 5 gigahertz? And he said, yeah, I turned that off too. And I said, now I understand Comcast puts public hotspots on my personal router, so anybody driving by can suck off of my router and get connection, which is really criminal because they're using my electricity to service the public for their services. That's bad. But I said, did you turn off that 2.4 hotspot? And he said, yeah. And I said, what about the 5 gigahertz hotspot? He said, you know, I turned all that off. I said, so why is this still going off the charts? He said, I don't know. So he fiddled, he couldn't fix it. He called his supervisor didn't know. And he said, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow with my supervisor. And I had remembered hearing an expert talking about an additional antenna. So I reached out to him that day and said, what else is going on? And they said, oh, Comcast is putting in a wireless security system antenna. Whether you have a wireless security system or not, they give you that with the antenna blasting full speed all the time. So when the guys came back the next day, my husband was nice enough that night to run down to one of the tech stores, and he just bought ourselves a router that has an on-off switch on the Wi-Fi that we can control. So those guys were pretty embarrassed the next day when they came back because they had no idea this equipment was doing this. And I said, as a show of good faith, you want to just swap out the routers for me? And they were nice enough to hook mine up for us. So yeah, it's tricky, but you definitely want to find out what's emitting in your home and start taking measures. So some can be turned off. Sometimes you want to put like a little metal shield around it, a Faraday cage. And there are groups out there that sell products like that too. So, all right. Well, wonderful, Paka or Steve. I'm so grateful that we've answered a lot of your questions and that you're going to take some measures to reduce your exposure. We have so many resources, so don't be shy about reaching out. Are there any other questions? Judy, what will be the best way to find this recording later online? Oh, you're muted, hon.
I can unmute through Ben Speaks. In about a week or so, we'll have it uploaded onto our website at benspeaks.org.
Okay.
And you can also watch for it in social media. It'll be, sent out through Facebook and Instagram and different places. But it will be available on our resource page on our website. Once it's uploaded there, it'll also be on our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to it.
Okay, good. And I'll
And we
put it
thank you
up on my
so
YouTube
much.
channel too.
Awesome. This has been great, Cece. Thank you so very much. I'm
You
sure
are
everybody
so
tonight got
welcome.
a lot out of this, so appreciate it.
Okay, one more question that just came in from Erin. She says,
Okay.
do you have any favorite adapters? Ours keep breaking. Unfortunately, I've heard that too, Erin. I don't, because I really don't use it myself. We're actually ordering another one for my daughter because hers broke too. The little nub that plugs into her phone kept popping back inside the nub. So unfortunately, I don't know of any that I would highly recommend, but we just keep trying and see if we find one. Robert Janku is asking if I have a reference that wireless uses 10 times more energy. Robert, I know you and I have communicated in the past. If you go into one of my emails, in my signature, you'll find my research repository called Understanding EMFs. And if you go in there to the 5G page, you will scroll down about a third of the way down and you'll find that IEEE article that says it uses 10 times more energy. So, and for anybody else who'd like to go pound around in my research repository, by all means, help yourself. You can just put, a search with Cece Doucette, Understanding EMFs for electromagnetic fields, and you'll come up with it. Okay, any last questions before we say goodnight? Oh, Gail is saying that there's a company called Less EMF, and I understand them to be a very credible group as well. They're really great with answering questions. So Erin, if you're still here, you might reach out to Less EMF and ask if they have a favorite adapter that they recommend too. All right. Okay, everybody, thank you so very much for your time. I know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose, but go freak out as you notice everything around you. Go scream into a pillow or whatever you do to get the anxiety out. But you're halfway there. Now that you know, you get to take control of the things within your control, and you can lend your voice. Go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and sign up with us. When we have action items that you can just do quickly, call your senator, call your state rep, call the Department of Public Utilities. We'll give you guidance on that and do the heavy lifting, but we can't do this without you too. Okay.
Thank you, Cece.
My pleasure, Judy. Happy holidays, everybody. Stay in the moment and appreciate all the joy that we do have.
Absolutely. Have a blessed night.
Take care.